Hello, and welcome to another season of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are starting a new series with we call them Creator Spotlights, we call them Zero Episodes. This is our spoiler-free introduction to the series Revival and its creators.
Yeah.
It's Image Comics, which if you have listened to this podcast or been in a comic shop, you know Image. We don't need to talk about Image.
We've covered them quite a bit. It's a horror book, though, which we haven't done a lot of.
The only times I've kicked it around are when it's like my favorite writer, Jeff Lemire, doing horror.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the Apocalyptic trilogy we did from Jamestown and the Fourth and Eric Donovan, those three books are I mean, they're horror books. There's
no way around that.
They're about the world ending, but there are
type
horror
of
elements.
Horror I can.
Yeah, this is a little more. The base of Revival is much more of your, even though it's not a standard horror story. The base concept is, again, this is not a spoiler. It's what the book's about. The dead come back to life, but not in the way you think, which is an important aspect of this book. But it's that idea that there's a section of people that died and came back to life. So it is their twist on the zombie story, on the zombie tropes. You mentioned Image Comics. This was ran for 47 issues from July 2012 to February 2017. One thing I wanted to note about this book, because I was looking back and I didn't read this book when it first came out. I think we'll talk about that as we go. I didn't come to it only until a couple years later. A couple years previous to as we're recording this. So several years after it started and even after it finished. But 2012 was like a busy time for Image. Like a couple big things hit. For example, like the Manhattan Projects book, people may or may not know, but that's Jonathan Hickman and Nick Pitara. Hickman, as we talked about when we did the Nightly News, his very first comic work came in with that and a book called Pax Romana. Stepped right into Image, books that he wrote and drew. And then from there, he went to Marvel and was at Marvel for 3 or 4 years, doing exclusively stuff there, setting up his Fantastic Four run, which eventually led all the way into like Secret Avengers and eventually into Secret Wars. That was a multi-year process. But just before 2012, he came back again, a new creator owned for the first time in a while, a book called The Red Wing for a little miniseries with Nick Pitara, and then come back again with the Manhattan Projects in 2012. 2012 was also when Fatale started, which was Brubaker and Phillips. We talked about them obviously a ton. This was their first book at Image, and just after this, they signed their exclusive Image deal. So prior to this, their books had either been at DC Wildstorm or Marvel Icon before everything got ported over to Image. So it's kind of a big deal for Fatale, for them and for Image to lock those guys down. Also in 2012, a little book called Saga premiered. Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. Yeah, you may have heard of that one.
Let's just get it out there. If there's anyone faithfully listening to our podcast that has not read Saga, I give you permission to take a month off of our podcast and just go catch up.
Yeah, pick up the compendium.
We're not going to cover it until it's completely finished, even if then.
Yeah. So that assumes the world still exists in like 2035, whatever it'll be when it ever be done. But yeah, so that was kind of a big deal. That Saga premiered. So not to say that Revival got lost in the shuffle. I don't mean that, but it was it came out at a time with some books that really landed. Interestingly too, because I was checking up on this, and I don't know if this was planned or coincidence or whatever, but The Walking Dead 100, which was at the time, big deal. It's a milestone issue. Anytime you hit 100, and ended up being just about halfway through the run. I think it went to 193 or something like that in all. But Walking Dead 100 came out the same day as Revival #1.
Oh,
yeah.
So even though they're quite different,
that's why I'm curious about that, because I wanted to see. I couldn't remember exactly how long Walking Dead had been out at this point, and that premiered in 2003. So just about 9 years was where The Walking Dead was at this point. But I happened to notice that, 100, an oversized issue came out the same day. And I wonder if there was any plan or intention of that, because you're right, outside of the general concept of people who were dead or no longer dead, but all the specifics around that are completely different, but I wonder if there was some little bit of cross company, like, hey, if you're reading The Walking Dead, check out Revival. It's also kind of sort of maybe about zombie. I don't know. I don't remember that at the time, but I thought that was interesting looking that up and seeing it. But yeah, still, Revival goes 47 issues, runs for 5 years. That's pretty darn good. Pretty darn good for a creator-owned book. I don't know how well it's sold, but obviously it's sold well enough to go on that long.
Well enough to go to 47.
Yeah.
Like, last week we covered Romulus, which was great in 4 issues.
Yeah.
So it's like just the sheer luck and like timing the market and like things out of your control that go into getting 47 issues.
100%. So, this book in the years since its completion, it's out in a number of different varieties. There are 8 trades. You think about how 8 goes into 47. The numbers are a little weird. We'll get into that. But there are 8 trade paperbacks out there. There are 4 deluxe hardcovers, which contain 2 trade paperbacks each, which we'll say right now, that's how we're going to cover it. We'll list out each of those deluxe editions, what issues are comprised each one of those, and it'll be in the show notes as well. But the 4 deluxe hardcovers are how we plan on doing our discussions, and kind of another kind of serendipitous thing, because this isn't how this isn't how we plan these things. It's not how we go about looking into deciding what books to discuss. But as you're listening, if you're listening to this episode, this 0 episode, at the day it's released or the week it's being released, a brand new Revival paperback compendium is scheduled for release on September 25th, 2024. Which is
make a great birthday present for me.
There you go. So someone out there
didn't already have all the trades.
Someone out there, buy that for Mike. So that's a brand new thing coming out, which happened to work out well for the way we're discussing this now. But I think part of the reason this is the book that's been on our to discuss list for a while. And I think one of the impetuses maybe for us discussing this, actually it ties into why there's a new compendium release coming out now, but our decision and the compendium aren't related. It's because this book has recently been optioned and picked up for adaptation at Sci-Fi. They're going to be doing but
that's
TV
also
series.
Not exclusively why we're doing. We're not adaptation chasers.
It's not, but this is the book you and I had talked about, and anytime there's some kind of like outside force, outside news or whatnot that brings a series back up into our consciousness, from maybe the back burner on our potential list, it makes us think about, maybe it's time to go and do this now.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of nudge there.
Just one thing sense. In the publication though, so speaking of nudges, a book that I have thrown out there a few times, as like, maybe we could do this, but we'd probably do it like 2 or 3 trades at a time, is Chew, which it's like, there's not that much to discuss about a book, that's basically just a detective procedural type thing. But it's really fun. It's really good.
Yeah.
And it has a crossover with Revival.
It does.
So I was going to be like, at the end of Revival, if we're still wanting more, I'm like, we could do that crossover to Chew and then just start going straight into Chew. But the problem is Chew is 12 trades, plus it's a lot. CHU, which
and then there's
13.
the kind of the sequel, the legacy sequel, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, the follow-up. So that's a lot to cover there. So
we'd be committed through Thanksgiving, I think.
Yeah, it'd be a lot to get
the whole Revival Chew crossover, but
yeah.
But the crossovers is the better of the 2 series.
The crossover is also
discussion.
It's one issue, definitely true. The crossover is one issue, and I think they do a good job. I think, because I'm familiar with Chew, but I believe the crossover does a pretty good job of explaining. If you're reading it from the Revival side, it does a good job explaining of what Chew is about. Like just the basic idea of it. Yeah. Because the way that crossover works, one side is written from the Revival side, one side written from the Chew side. So if you're a cheerleader who had picked up the crossover. I think they do a solid job of explaining what's going on in Revival, so you can at least read the one-off
Yeah,
issue.
I gather that it's like the Fables Unwritten crossover. Whereas, like, if you're only
Yeah.
reading one of the books, you'll hang with it.
Actually, no, because that was only a unwritten crossover.
Into
Fables,
the Fables world.
yeah, there was never anything written from the Fable standpoint. The Fables
Okay.
creators came in to write those characters and do some art and things like that. But if you were reading Fables, you would have no idea that thing existed, and it would not impact the way you
It
read
never
it at
showed up
all.
in any of the collected editions.
Never,
Okay.
no, yeah, it's only an unwritten story, so it's a little different in that sense. Um, but yeah, so that's Revival in terms of publication. Do you want to give a quick? I know we'll tease it later, but do you happen to? You're always the one who has the official synopses pulled up,
Oh yeah. Well, I had drifted away from that to the
or maybe
Wikipedia one, which is full
Wikipedia.
spoiler. But um,
Read the image one if you have that one.
I'm yeah. Oh, here. This is actually for the Revival Compendium, which I think
Okay,
is the best.
that's fine. That's solid.
Okay, so it says Revival Compendium, the beautiful farm noir that puts a new twist on the zombie genre, now collected for the first time in one complete paperback volume. For one day in rural central Wisconsin, the dead came back to life. Now it's up to Officer Dana Cypress to deal with the media scrutiny, religious zealots, and government quarantine that has come with them. In a town where the living have learned to deal with those who are supposed to be dead, Officer Cypress must solve the brutal murder of her own sister. Now everyone, alive or undead, is a suspect, while M. Cypress, murder victim, keeps getting in Dana's way. That's the end of the synopsis. And actually, all they did was tag out an extra sentence on the beginning with that farm noir tag, which I actually think is a pretty cool.
Yeah, I think initially it was they. I think the creators Seeley and Norton. I think they called it like a rural noir, but the same sort of thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's that sort of thing.
I'm curious what else falls under the farm noir genre. Essex County, maybe. I don't know.
Well, yes, it probably would be. There was very much. I think in the first deluxe edition, there's a foreword by Jeff Lemire, and this is the kind of story that I think Lemire even says like he wish he would have written or wish he would have thought of. It's the kind of thing that he would think of and obviously write in a completely different way, but it's in that same kind of milieu. Small town, isolated, contained community, with a little bit of horror, supernatural, something going on in the background. You know,
Yeah.
there are those elements in there. So, but yeah, that's a good synopsis. There, I do think there's a minor spoiler there for like the first issue, I think, but it's all right.
Yeah, I'm like in a 47 issue series, I don't mind spoiling a little bit about
Yeah, well,
the first issue.
It's also not that critical, because it's in the first issue, and it is a storyline that goes throughout the entire run. It's not even it's not even like the main impetus. It's actually kind of like an underlying like B story. They come back to every once in a while, then it becomes a big thing at the end when it wraps up. But yeah, it's a minor spoiler, but it's all right. Read the first issue, you'll understand. So yeah, that's we'll talk a little more maybe about our history with the book. I guess we should probably go into, like we normally do, go to the creative team, who's I've already name checked Tim Seeley and Mike Norton as our main guys here. Yeah,
there's a lot to talk about with Tim Seeley.
Yeah.
I think in terms of, just his resume.
Yeah,
there's a lot to cover there.
He's done a ton. I will say we touched on him briefly back when we talked about Plume by Kaylin Smith.
Oh yeah,
because that was a webcomic she had done that was eventually ported over and published in print, and that was done by Devil's Due Comics. Devil's Due was a small independent publisher out of Chicago, and both Tim Seeley and Mike Norton had significant ties and jobs, and did a lot of work for and with Devil's Due because they're both Chicago guys. There's a hearty Midwesternness to this collaboration and to this book and to a lot of the books that both of these guys work on. They actually all work together. Tim Seeley, Mike Norton, and the cover artist who will talk about, Jenny Frison. They're all Chicagoland people. They work together at 4-Star Studios in Chicago, which it was founded. I don't know if it was founded by Seeley or founded by all of them. It doesn't really matter. They all work together. They all come out of the same space. Whenever I go to C2E2 in Chicago, the big Comic-Con in there in Chicago, that's usually in the spring. They're always there, and they're always tabled next to each other. Like all the Chicagoland people are all there. Regardless, they're it's kind of their hometown show. So I'm sure that makes collaboration a lot easier when you're all literally working in the same space. But Tim Seeley, probably best known for Hack Slash, his book that he created. Started at, well, it's been everywhere. It's been on Devil's Due, which eventually became Image. It's been on Dynamite. It's a horror book. It takes the trope of the final girl, which is, people know from, I don't know, every horror movie ever made. And it follows her after she is the victim of a serial killer attack. She's the final girl, and then she lives and then devotes the rest of her life to going killing monsters, to stopping it happening from somebody else. So it's been a long running book that he has both written and drawn, and then just written and then worked on story for, because the world is expansive. A lot of creators have come in and out, like I said, a lot of different publishers. But if you know anything of Tim Seeley, it's probably Hack Slash. Although I guess maybe
I mean, not counting his big two stuff.
Yeah. I said even that, if you go like to his, like, I'm pretty sure his banner at shows is Cassie Hack, the character from, like, it isn't any of the work he's done. Although he has done quite a bit of work. I would say mostly at DC, did a lot of work in the 2010s and beyond. So kind of late New 52, and definitely did a lot of books during Rebirth in 2016. He worked on Batman Eternal and Batman Robin Eternal, which was a kind of lead up into cut towards the end of New 52. He co-wrote Grayson with Tom King. That was when Dick Grayson stopped being Nightwing and became a secret agent working for an organization called Spiral.
His cover was blown. Yeah.
When his identity was revealed and he faked his death. But he went from Grayson, which was the end of the New 52, into writing Nightwing when Rebirth started right afterwards. He also wrote Green Lantern's Rebirth. He wrote a run on that. That was a book that focused on the two newest at the time Green Lanterns, Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz. He did Hellblazer Rebirth with John Constantine. He did a book called Robins, which was really, really fun. That was like a fan voted thing. DC put out a poll saying, which of these, they did kind of a tournament style. Which of these titles would you want us to do? And Robins won, and which is a book about all the Robins coming together. And Tim Seeley wrote that, which was super, super fun, even if it was just like a 4 or 5 issue miniseries. Over at Marvel, he has most recently done he wrote a Spider-Gwen series called Gwenverse, which was, a multiverse story starring various versions of Gwen Stacy. The ones in which she lives in the universe, because she dies in most of them. He did a little Shatterstar miniseries over in the X Office, 2018, 2019. Deadpool versus Thanos miniseries, which I never read that because I'm not a real big Deadpool guy, but he wrote that. And actually, currently, he's writing as we record this, at least, he's writing a little miniseries for the Venom War crossover. It's a Wolverine Venom War. He's co-writing that with Tony Fleecs, who's another Chicagoland guy, who actually Seeley and Fleecs are currently co-writing an Image book called Local Man, which is kind of a homage / send up class. No, it's an homage of like 90s superhero Image action books and kind of like what the guy's doing today. But it's a fun book over at Image. Also at Image, he's done some other stuff, like he's written some Witchblade, which we mentioned last week as 2 weeks ago, as part of the Top Cow imprint. He has a book called Loaded Bible over at Image, which initially was pitched as Jesus versus vampires. Never read it, but actually knowing some of the stuff that Tim Seeley's done, doesn't seem totally out of the realm of possibility that he would have done. He has written some G.I. Joe, some non-canon G.I. Joe. This is when the license was at Devil's Due and then eventually ported over to Image. He's written some books there, written some G.I. Joe stuff. Actually, some of those series he did the art was done by Mike Norton, who we'll get to next year. So he's done some work there. A book called The Roadie at Dark Horse, which was with artist Fran Galan, who we talked about when we interviewed Kyle Starks. The two of them, Starks and Galan, worked together on Pine and Merrimack. So very cool, fun little miniseries book there. A couple books over at
Fran Galan, I gotta say, shot himself into my top 10 favorite artists with just that series.
Oh, he's incredible.
Like, I was just like, I'm sorry, how is this guy not totally blown up? Lying around the corner at every convention, working for both big publishers.
He's someone that needs to hopefully get more work. But so yeah, the book The Roadie at Dark Horse that Seeley did with him, fun, cool book there. A couple books at Aftershock worth mentioning. A book called Dark Red and another one called Brilliant Trash. Brilliant Trash had covers by Mike Norton, and I think Tim Seeley did he wrote the scripts, but I think he did that story with his brother, who also kind of works at the studio and isn't quite on the creative side, but I think that was a collaboration of two of them there. And he's also coming up later this year, as you record this in November 2024, he is going to be doing a book over at Archie Comics called Archie as Mr. Justice. And that is actually a book he's doing with Mike Norton. It is kind of the Archie books, coming up in the fall are going to be taking a kind of a fun little turn where all the characters they're moving into like genre spaces where all the characters are going into various genre books, which is something that Archie has done a ton before. Archie's done a lot of horror and sci-fi and things like that, but they're kind of launching these new books that are coming out, and Archie is going to be basically a Superman type character, Mr. Justice, and like I said, it's back. It's Seeley and Norton again working on that book together, as they've done so many times before. So look for that in November if you're an Archie fan. So that actually should be a lot of fun. Those books are the weird random Archie and Friends stuff. Those books are actually super, super fun, even if they are really, really weird. So that's something to check out coming up here. Let's see here. I guess real quick.
What's your biggest personal connection?
I was
work. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you that. Prior to Revival, it had been his DC stuff. It had been like Grayson, Nightwing, Green Lanterns, and things like that. I've read some. I've read Hack Slash on and off. I'm aware of it. Again, I'm not a super big horror guy, and that's more like mainstream kind of kind of monster horror. But I would say his DC work, even though I've read some of his Marvel stuff. I've read the Spider-Gwen verse. I've read Local Man, his Image book that he's doing now. But most of that comes now because I know who Tim Seeley is. But I would say my biggest connection with him would have been DC, which is why I went back and eventually read something like Revival once I had a sense of who he was as a writer and a creator and all that. What about you? I'm assuming probably the same, right? DC?
Grayson. Yeah. Specifically Grayson. Mm-hmm. And, I didn't understand till years later. So at the time I was reading Grayson, I didn't really know who Tom King was. Yeah. He just
few people did. Did.
Yeah. I would say I didn't, and I didn't read Detective Comics, when he was on that. So he really popped onto my radar. I basically same Batman first, and then very shortly after Mr. Miracle. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, oh, this guy's great. And I didn't realize that I had read this whole massive run that he was a co-author of. Yeah. Or collaborating author. I don't know how you would title it when they like alternate.
They were co-writers. I believe they collaborated on story. And then I think they alternated like who actually wrote the script. Like they alternated issues as to who wrote the script, but story they worked together on. And I think that DC was doing this because they were trying to pair Tom King with a veteran writer, someone who had been in the business a little longer, to help ease him into some of the superhero stuff. Because at that point, when Tom King started doing Grayson, I think he had already done or had pitched Sheriff of Babylon, which the book he did at which was published over at Vertigo. He had done Omega Men, I think, which had been started and then canceled and then allowed to finish. He was doing The Vision over at Marvel. And all this led up to him getting Batman, and when you write a Batman #1, that's kind of a big deal. But yeah, the idea for Grayson, I think, was to help pair him with someone who had more experience in the business, so he could kind of get some reps in. And Grayson was a cool book. And also I think they felt like, hey, you were in the CIA, you can do this book about Dick Grayson being a spy. But it's basically Dick Grayson doing like James Bond stuff, which is like not what real spies do, and definitely not what Tom King did. But it made for a nice story, I guess. It made for
no, yeah. Well, I think the best, if they had ever done this Easter egg, because one time I think Seth Meyers is like a big comic fan, and he had Tom King on his late show one time, and was asking him about the whole CIA to comic thing, and Tom said something like, he said, yeah, you know what, I was like flying somewhere for the CIA. It kind of gave my cover away when I would sit on, in coach and just plop down a big stack of single issue comics, start reading. It's like no one suspects a spy for the U.S. government when it's just some nerd sitting there in coach reading a stack of DC comics.
Yeah.
Which I thought was pretty good cover.
Actually, you know what? Total random tangent about that. Brian Michael Bendis and David Mack did a book called Cover, which is that is literally the plot of that book. The idea that spy agencies would recruit comic creators, comic artists, because they get invited to fly all around the world for conventions and things of that nature. So if that idea seems interesting to you, go read Cover. It's a 6-issue series.
That'd be a great excuse for us to cover B&B, who we've wanted to for a while, and Mac, who I'd like to talk about.
Maybe on the potential back burner. But anyway, back to our creators here for Revival.
Yeah, and then I'd say most recently from Seeley, though, he has had a small, possibly increasing role in the Minor Threats universe.
That is true. Yes,
the alternates.
Yeah.
Which I think he was supposed to be at the Columbus Comic Con last year, and he missed his flight, or flight was canceled or something. He was not there on Friday when we were there.
He missed his flight. He was there on the weekend, on Saturday when we were there on a Friday.
So anyway, I had 3 or 4 books to get signed by him. I've met him before, and when I met him, I had taken Grayson #1 to get signed, which was like the big deal to me. And he how they always take a look at what you brought, and then they've got to say something about it.
Yeah.
And he said, I've never felt weirder than writing the script for this book, when I had to write in great detail how much we were going to be glorifying Dick Grayson's body. There's so many shirtless, in his underwear scenes of him doing acrobatics and things like that. And he was like, I just was sitting there at my keyboard. I'm just like, this is a little weird, but I think he took it in good, because I think writers and artists have objectified women's bodies for the whole history of comics.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, it's a nice role reversal to have to, to do it for the male character, and then be like, oh, maybe it's icky to be describing bodies like this.
Yeah, you would think. But the objectification of Dick Grayson is like,
it's,
I mean, that's DC canon at this point.
And I think the way it's handled nowadays, like Tom Taylor and who's no longer on Nightwing, but
he's finishing up Nightwing. Yes.
I was looking at the solicits today, so I'm already moved on to the next writer in my head.
He hasn't quite finished, but I mean, I'm sure he's done writing because the book's already out. But yeah, that's what Dick Grayson is, and it's played for jokes in that way because of the history of objectification of women. That now we have a male character, and that is the role that Dick Grayson plays, and everyone knows it in the DC universe.
Kenneth.
Yeah, he more than that. That's maybe someday we'll do a book with. I don't know if we ever jump back.
I would just like it if
Marvel
they did
DC.
a Barbie homage cover where it was a Nightwing action figure, but instead of saying that his job is beach, it says his job is circus, or something. Where it's like, no, not lifeguard, beach.
Yeah. Okay. Mike Norton, name mentioned already. He's the artist on here, and co-creator. He is probably best well known for his webcomic called Battle Pug, which has been published in print at Image, and I think also at Dark Horse. I'm not sure which one came first, but you can get collections of that. That is a long running webcomic. That his thing, he cartoons the whole thing with that. Also has some work at the big two. Obviously, he did over at DC. He did a run on Green Arrow and Black Canary. A few issues there. A few issues of Trinity, which is mainly this was the second or third series called Trinity. This is the late aughts, 0809. Kurt Busiek and Mark Bagley were the main creators on that, but I think Norton was one of the many artists who contributed, whether it's pages, panels, issues, things like that, for different reasons, brought in on that. Done a ton of spot issues, mini runs, things like that. Worked on series like the All New Adam, did a Shazam book, Booster Gold, things like that. So a lot of random work here and there, nothing major steady at DC, and similarly over at Marvel. His biggest credit at Marvel is probably Young Avengers, the series that was done by Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey, because Mike Norton inked all of McKelvey's issues there. And I think he's done quite a bit of inking for Jamie McKelvey, at least back in the day, back in the time, there would have been early 2010, something like that. So not just doing his own interior work, but working as part of the team with someone else. He did covers for the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. miniseries. That was a specific tie-in to the former show that was on ABC. Covers only there. Did a couple issues of Runaways in its second series, second volume, I guess, still being written by Brian K. Vaughan. I think he did a little mini run, like 3-4 issues there. Also did a relatively ish recently. Actually wasn't that recently. I guess it's been about 10 years now. Jesus, Secret Wars 10 years ago. With Marguerite Bennett, which was a miniseries called Years of Future Past, which was an X-Men themed Secret Wars tie-in at the time. So he did the interiors on that stuff there. A lot of his time in the early aughts was spent as like art director at Devil's Due. So you'll see his name on a lot of things, a lot of books there in terms of like design or editor or things of that nature, because he's there working in more of an editorial capacity. But again, I did mention he did some G.I. Joe books, a lot of them with Tim Seeley while he was over at Devil's Due.
Very nice.
Yep. Oh, one note here. I want to miss this. While Mike Norton is the artist on Revival, there are a couple of guest artists that come in, not for full issues in Revival, but like there are some collaborators where they come in for maybe some pages or some panels, things of that nature, especially in the middle of the series. I think we'll get to them in in Deluxe Volumes 2 and 3, I think the only ones that have them, but we'll get to those and name those artists when we get to those issues. Because again, that at no point was there ever like a full issue that Mike Norton didn't do. But I think there are a couple pages here and there where another artist was brought in for one reason or another. I can't really tell. Sometimes I think I can infer maybe it's a story issue, like they want to convey a different sense to the reader, so they're bringing a different art style. I think that's what they're trying to accomplish by doing that. Or it could just be that whatever reason they needed a guest artist to come in for a handful of pages. I don't know, but we're not going to name those artists here. Some of them are artists that people are going to know and recognize. But when we get to those issues, we'll point them out and give them their credit. So.
Yeah, that's how we've done it for other series. There's still he is still the series artist who does all the character design, does the lion's share of issues.
Exactly. Yeah. And it was similar to what we did when we talked about The Unwritten with artist Peter Gross. He didn't do he's a co-creator, didn't do every single issue, because sometimes they had like half issues and things like that. Other artists come in, filling in for whatnot, but still it's his series. It's him and Mike Carey. So in a similar way, even though a guest artist may come in, this is Tim Seeley and Mike Norton's book. His colorist for this book is Mark Englert, who has done a handful of stuff for Mike Norton. A lot of work at Image, working on things like Hack Slash, Loaded Bible, Invincible, No One, which is part of the massive verse right now that Kyle Higgins and his crew out of the Radiant Black series. Some books at Aftershock like Dark Red and Baby Teeth. A lot of books here that are written by Tim Seeley, and currently over at Mad Cave, he's coloring the ongoing Dick Tracy book right now, the newest incarnation of Dick Tracy, but no Marvel and DC work. So all of his stuff is independent. Said a lot of Image, a lot of Aftershock, Mad Cave, a lot of Dynamite, things of that nature, but no Marvel and DC work. And similar goes for the letterer, who was Crank, who we talked about back when we did 8 Billion Genies, the book by Charles Soule and Ron Brown. So you can check that out to get a little more on Crank and the books that he's worked on. Almost all of Charles Soule's books at Image, Crank does the letters for. But again, no Marvel and DC work for him, much like the colorist Mark Engler. And that brings us to, I guess, the last creative that we want to really hit on, because I think her contribution to the series is critical, and that is the cover artist Jenny Frison, who did 46 of the 47 covers. There is one cover, issue 12, I think it is. Yes, issue 12, which was done by Scotty Young, which makes sense when we get to what that issue is about, but is the only cover that Jenny Frison didn't do. So she did 46 of 47, but it's
and really, when you count variants and reprints, she really did like 69 of 70 or something.
Well, and she did all the art. I don't think she did the art for the trade paperback covers. I think that's Mike Norton, but she did new art for the deluxe edition hardcovers, the ones that we're covering on this show, and she did new art for the compendium that's coming out in a few weeks here. So she did all of that there and all the issues. But yeah, so I think her contribution here is critical, because it's the way that I recognized the book before I knew who she was as an artist. Hers was a style. I was like, oh, I know that person. I know that looks like this other book that I've seen, So before I knew who she was by name, I recognized her style and was like, oh, that's the person that does some of these issues, these variants over here, or things like that. But it wasn't until she started doing regular covers for like Wonder Woman, or variants for Wonder Woman as part of the New 52, and eventually doing them for like Catwoman, things like that, and doing a lot of variants for Marvel and DC starting in like 2014, 15, 16, 17, something like that. So basically, after Revival had started and finished is when I really started. That's when I put a name to the artwork, and I knew, okay, this is this person's art. I can recognize it. I like it. And I can spot it on the shelf now. But when Revival first came out, I didn't have that awareness. But her artwork, her cover art, is what it drew my eye to the series. I didn't read the series because I didn't read horror at the time, and I still don't really read horror. And I think I had a misconception of what this book was. So, but I would see the covers and be drawn to them, but then be like, it's a horror book, I'm not going to read it.
Yeah, I very similarly, I I had seen Frison at several shows, and then I was, I now just buy Frison covers all the time.
Yeah.
And 2 times ago, when I was going to see Frison at a show, I was kind of going through my boxes, and I was like looking at League of Comic Geeks, and then I saw like Revival with like the number 50 or something there. I was like, 50 credits. I was like, that's a lot more than Frison typically does in a series. I pulled it up, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is gorgeous. So I was like, yeah, I'll take any one of these. So I went and picked up a reprint of the first issue and read it, and I was like, that's a little. I was like, I kind of like it more than I expected to, given the premise, but I'm not really sure it's me. And then I think I ended up not getting it signed, but then I returned to it because I found the trades for like $3 a pop used, and I was like, no, I like Tim Seeley enough. I respect Frison enough. Why don't I just give this whole thing a spin? And that was like late last year or earlier this year when I found all those trades.
Yeah, so that's just when you started reading this book. I think we can go into that now. I mentioned it. I remember seeing this book when it came out, But it wasn't, like I said, I in my mind I equated it with The Walking Dead. It's a zombie book, and I had already at that point like was done with The Walking Dead. I don't need to read that stuff anymore. But I kept seeing these covers, and I remember, so you guys, this isn't a video thing, but Mike, you can see it behind me. I have two covers that are signed by Tim Seeley and Mike Norton and Jenny Frison. One is number 1 and one is number 20. And issue 20 is it's one of the characters, M. She is jumping in the air with a big smile on her face, and she's holding hands with Jesus. That's the cover. And I remember seeing that. So that's issue 20. So that's, just about halfway through. So at this point, 2 or 3 trades are probably out at that point, probably at least 2. I remember seeing that cover and being like, wait, I thought that revival book, isn't that a zombie book? Like, what is this cover? And it was evocative enough for me to then go pick up the first trade, look at it, and kind of read the synopsis and be like, oh, and kind of flip through it, even though I wasn't in the shop, and be like, oh, it's not quite a zombie book, not in the way we think of zombies, like not in the way of Walking Dead or George Romero or anything like that. It's a different kind of book. And that was more intriguing, but still horror wasn't my thing at the time. So it was like, okay, well, I now have a better understanding of this book, but I'm not in the mood to really read it. And it wasn't until, gosh, it was 2019 when I read the first deluxe edition. I got them all digitally, and I read the first deluxe edition, and I was like, I'm in. And then 5 billion other things came in for me to read, and I didn't get to it. I didn't finish it. I didn't finish it until the next year. It was for me, this was a 2020 lockdown read, where I was like, I read the first deluxe volume a year ago, and not doing anything now. So now I'm just going to power through and read everything. So I first read the whole series, as we're recording this now, just about 4 years ago, but hadn't come back to it since, hadn't returned to it until I reread it for our discussion, getting ready for our discussion here. So it's interesting. One thing I think will be interesting to clock is, without stepping on too many third rails all at once, the politics, the political angle, the religious angle of this book, when it was coming out, how it would have been viewed then, even though it was only, 10, 15, some odd years, 10-ish years ago, plus or minus a few years, versus how those views may play reading it now. And I think it makes an interesting question for how they're going to do the TV adaptation. There's no need to set this in 2012 because the book takes place, quote unquote, in 2012. So there's no need to set the show that way. So if you set the show in 2025 when it's supposed to come out, the show is supposed to come out on Sci-Fi, if you play the same kind of characters, the same political viewpoints, the same religious viewpoints, things like that, those read differently now than they did 10 years ago. So it makes for an interesting conversation to have read it then versus if you read it at the time, even though it's only recent history, because so much change has changed in the world. But that's a conversation we can get to down the line. But I think it's something to kind of clock right now, and something to kind of put a pin in that, thinking about how it might translate, because it's not like those views are out of date or anything like that. If anything, the views that are presented as fringe when the book starts in 2012 are now way more mainstream. So in a lot of sense, they're like less shocking. They're less, you know what I'm saying? Like,
well,
they're less
there's I think a bigger national spotlight on the farm noir people. Like
on the characters that I think Seeley and Norton present as borderline caricatures, those those characters, those people are now, they are much more prevalent. They're much more known. They're much more visible now, and they are no longer fringe characters, fringe voices, fringe opinions. They're much more mainstream now. So it's a curious idea to see how that might play out. But I think that's what I find interesting about this book, even though I think as a kind of a bit of a tease going forward, I think it has some storytelling trip ups like the mechanics and the order in which things happen. Even though I like the story overall, I think when we get into like the third and fourth acts of the story towards the end, I think there's some, there's some trip ups there, but I think the ideas are still very good. So I think it makes for a good discussion that I'm really looking forward to get into, to talk about, because this isn't the kind of book we normally discuss, a horror book, things like that. It isn't a book that we normally go into. So,
well, and it's curious that we picked this one because there's the horror aspect of it and like the supernatural of it all.
mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, there's also a detective mystery story here.
There is, yeah.
And the number of detective mystery books that we've kicked around, like doing a criminal, Brubaker Phillips thing for you, but even you were like, I don't know what to say about them other than wasn't that great? Wasn't that great?
Yeah.
Wasn't that great?
Yeah.
Really good discussion.
Yeah. In ways we have to disguise it, right? Like Velvet, it's a detective story, but it's a spy story.
Right. Good Asian was a detective story, but it was
also a period piece. It was a race piece. Yeah. So maybe you're right. We come into this with a different angle. And I think one thing I love about this book is it doesn't mess around with the premise. When the book starts, at least in issue 1, so there.
Right. There's no mystery box in Lost.
You're dropped in, and it's like day 29 of quarantine of the town, So the book isn't about like the reveal isn't like, and the dead come back to life. Like, no. That's already accepted as true. The people of the town are already dealing with the fact that the person who is working at the cashiers and who's working the checkout counter at the grocery store is someone that died a month ago, but is now just back because what else are you going to do? You're going to go back to work, And so the book becomes about characters, and it becomes about this underlying, you're right, the underlying mystery, because we are dealing with cops here. So the book is not explicitly about the character. The surprise isn't that the dead come back to life. And I like that it doesn't mess around with that premise. It doesn't
I
waste
think
time.
A lesser number 1 would have made the last page someone's eye opening, and it's like, oh, the dead came back to life, and then that's really what the book's about, and the rest of the number 1 was a waste.
Exactly. And so we should say that if you're reading this in single issue, which it's available, you can get it out there, you can find these issues, dollar bins, used bookstores, things like that. Before this book premiered in July of 2012, in right before then, for Free Comic Book Day that year, there was a 5-page prequel story that they put out. There was, if you look for, you can probably find it out there. Maybe hard to find because it is a revival prequel, but it's Free Comic Book Day 2012. It's Image 20. It was the 20th anniversary of Image Comics. And in there, they previewed some stuff that was coming up later that year. And there's a 5-page prequel for revival, which it does exactly what we talked about. It sets up like it takes place the moment when the dead come back to life for the first time. And if you read it in trade or in the collections, or I'm sure in the compendium as well, that's the first 5 pages of the book. So it's included in all of the stories there. And I think also in the regular trades as well. So it's only something you have to hunt down if you're reading this in specific single issue floppies. But in all the collected editions, you'll get this little 5-page prequel that does exactly what we're talking about. It shows the moment when the dead come back to life, and then there's a quote unquote chapter break. You see you see Jenny Frison's cover art for the first issue, and then you jump right into the story, and which I think is like 28, 29 days into the quarantine. So you jump right ahead. So if you had missed that prequel story, if you had missed that little 5-page Free Comic Book Day story, you would have been dropped directly into that first page of like people at the edge of the quarantine of the town, trying to get in, trying to get answers, things like that. You're dropped into the situation as opposed to the beginning of it. And again, I like that the story doesn't mess around with that, doesn't waste time with it, puts it in a Free Comic Book Day prequel, 5 pages, gets it out of the way, and you hit the ground running on page 1 of issue 1. And it tells you what kind of story you're going to get, that it's the dead are back, and that's an important part, but they're not using that as the surprise,
Yeah. I think we'll get into that as we discuss, how the plot unfolds in development and pacing and all that stuff. But Just that shows that this is not his first book. This shows that he's a seasoned writer.
These guys know what they're doing. They know what they're doing.
How to avoid making the big thing the gimmick, which, in prose novels, I am a fan of Blake Crouch for basically the same reason. If you've never read his stuff, you may have seen the show Dark Matter on Apple TV Plus.
That's one that you recommend. That's a book you recommended to me back when we started this podcast a couple of years ago that I still haven't gotten to yet.
Even if you just watch the Apple TV show,
haven't watched the show yet. I want to read the book first because I'm that kind of guy. But
it's a multiversal thing, and like he doesn't make a meal out of the fact that that's what it is. Like the reveal of what's happening in terms of like, he's interacting with another version of himself from another universe. That Band-Aid is ripped off almost immediately. Like you start reading the first 10 pages, you're like, oh, I read comics. I totally know where this is going. And at the end of like chapter 2,
does it to you.
It's like, no, that's not the plot. That's the setting. Wow. And likewise in Revival, the dead came back to life. And we should also note that it is a play on words, Revival or a homonym, maybe, it's both like, the dead were resuscitated, they are revived back to life, but also kind of the religious revivalism.
There's a lot. It's got multiple meanings there.
I'm curious what Seeley's background with religion is. I would imagine not super positive, but I don't think he's like, it's not a book that's out to trash religion or religious people.
No, I think we can make some inferences, fair or unfair, as we read through it, based on how certain characters react to the idea of the religiosity aspect of an event like this. And so maybe that's unfair to put on the creators, but I think there's a discussion there. There's some nuggets there to be mined and talked about, because it's obviously a major factor in the story, and you would imagine it would be if it's one of those things that if the dead came back to life in any form, whether it's like this, whether it's like The Walking Dead, whether it's like ghosts or whoever it is, like there's a fundamental religious question there that has to be addressed and talked about. So it's naturally a part of the story.
Yeah. Anything else we need to say about this book? Oh, I mean, other than it will be in the episode titles, but we are going to be doing the deluxe versions, which is two paperbacks.
It is
per
two
week.
trades. Yeah. So we'll say right now, the deluxe edition 1, which is trade paperbacks 1 and 2. But let's say you happen to pick up the compendium, and you read along at, next week when that comes out and you pick that up. Awesome. Call your local comic shop and she'll have it in stock. If you're reading that way in the compendium, Deluxe Edition 1 is issues 1 through 11, and plus that free comic book day prologue, which will be in the beginning. So stop after issue 11 if you're reading in compendium, or if you happen to have the single issues. But we'll give that for right now. But in the episode notes, we'll have the breakdown for each one of them. So you said if you can start to plan and see what they are. But in general, 2 trade backs at a time, or just pick up the deluxe editions, which should be available at comic shops. They're probably the things that are available in bookstores. I don't know if the trade paperbacks are in print anymore, unless you go to like a used bookstore. So if you go to a regular bookstore, actually the regular bookstore will probably have the compendium in stock too when it comes out, but the deluxe hardcovers are probably what's there, and you can definitely get them digitally, at your library through Amazon or Comixology, whatever it is. This book's available to be out there, but the deluxe editions are how we're covering this story for our discussions, for our purpose.
Yes. I've got them all in single paperbacks, like I said, $3 a piece. And
so you can find them. They don't, but they're probably used bookstores, because I don't think they're in print right now. So
I found it all at one used bookstore. Clearly, someone just dumped their whole collection.
Exactly.
And I was sold.
Maybe that person picked up all 4 of the hardcovers, the deluxe hardcovers, because the deluxe hardcovers are really, really great. So we talked about that Jenny Frison did new artwork for them. They're really, really great. So each of the 4 deluxe hardcovers, there's a single person, like a mostly full body shot on the front cover. And then on the back, you see them from behind. And maybe there's someone else behind them. They're holding something behind their back or something like that. So you get a front and back image on the front and back covers of the hardcovers. So it's really cool new art that she did. And I've seen the art for the compendium, which looks awesome as well. The new one that's coming out. So they look great on a shelf. This is the book that you dig. Those deluxe hardcovers of that compendium would look awesome on your bookshelf.
Yeah. And, read it now with us as we go through it, and you can be ahead of the trend when the show drops.
Absolutely. 100%. When this comes in. So Sci-Fi just said it's coming. They put it in their press release that it's coming in 2025. So it's in active development. I don't think I've seen any kind of casting news or anything like that, but it was, they say it's going to be on the air next year sometime. So when it does, you can be that guy who's like, you know what, you be like, you know what, then, it's a comic, right? And, and you can be the guy that being like, yeah, well, they pulled that directly, like that's directly from that issue there, or they changed that, they tweaked that a little bit. You can be that guy, which
They're
is the guy
totally going to scramble the order of revelations.
Yeah.
In fact, it would not surprise me if they did for the first, pilot or whatever, basically a long form version of the get to know the characters, get to know the town, and then what that little free comic day thing did.
I disagree. I mean, we can get into that. Maybe
I'm not saying they should.
Well,
I'm saying I don't know if they'll be able to resist.
Let's put a pin in that specifically. Maybe let's wait until we get to the end. So our Deluxe Volume 4 discussion. Maybe let's spend a moment there talking about how we think some of the choices they may or may not make or could make for the TV adaptation. How about that?
That's
write
the
that
place
down.
for it.
Yeah. After we've seen the whole story, we can talk about how it will or won't translate. Because I think it does translate very well. It's set up to translate very well. It's the kind of story that you can, for lack of a better term, drag out over multiple seasons and cover so many different aspects, only to then, when you're ready to end it, then circle around to the end of the comic history. But we'll come back to that after we discuss Volume 4, Deluxe Volume 4. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Great. We will see you next week for Deluxe Volume 1, Trades 1 and 2, or issues 1 through 11.
1 through 11, plus the free comic book. Yep.
And free comic book. Yes.
Yep.
See ya.
Peace.